All right, hey, good morning, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is, was it Saturday? It's Saturday, November 5th, 2022. That's right. I'm coming to you in November with a video, which is something I thought I might never do, but here we are. I think I actually did this last year when the storms were hitting Central America. So we've had November videos before, but they are rare. And, well, we have a rare season on our hands because this season has decided it's not done, even though we are now almost a week into the month of November. The 2022 season appears to be making up for lost time. We've had a couple more storms since Ian, since the last time we talked. None of them were all that consequential. We had Lisa move into Belize in Central America. That system has dissipated today over the Gulf of Mexico. And we had Martin move away. It's a big, powerful winter type low pressure system, but it's up and gone. So now we're looking at this system down here in the Western Atlantic, Southwest Atlantic, Northern Caribbean region for potential for subtropical or tropical development over the next couple days. We're going to be looking at a what would be considered for most people, the easiest way to describe it is a nor'easter type low developing off the coast of Florida and then moving either towards Florida, over Florida, or somewhere near Florida, and potentially maybe even going into the Gulf, coming back across. We got a couple scenarios on our hands, but this is going to be a decently high impact coastal storm event and could bring some heavy rain to much of Florida and the rest of the southeast, and is definitely worth talking about. So that's what we're going to mostly focus on today. We also have this kind of compact low pressure system near Bermuda, and this system actually likely to develop as well. I think the Hurricane Center is going to have to go up on their predictions here today. And this one could actually steal a name before this one does, but this system right here is what eventually will be bringing some very wet, windy weather to much of the southeast U.S. as we go into next week. So let's go ahead and look at the National Hurricane Center's map. That's the main system here, but I'll show you the other ones. Lisa dissipated. And to be clear, there's no other active storms in any ocean basin. The tropical cyclone, the Indian Ocean's gone. There's nothing in the Western Pacific or the Eastern Pacific, and there's no other active storms in the Atlantic basin with Lisa killed off. So we only are watching these two developing systems this morning in the basin for activity. And again, I think this 30% here by Bermuda is going to go up a good bit by 2 o'clock. And this system probably goes at least red in the 2 o'clock update. So start off with the water vapor imagery, get a quick overview of what is going on. We have this strong upper trough digging into the Atlantic, the Southwest Atlantic basin. We have a trough moving up through as the low pressure that gave all the tornadoes of Texas and Oklahoma last night. That system is starting to move off to the east. And what's happening is this trough's about to cut off because right now you've got this sharp bend in the winds and this trough sitting here over the Southwest Atlantic. Well, this is going to get cut off. What's eventually going to happen is these winds right here coming up are going to basically overrun the system, and you're going to have this trough sink down and cut off and become an upper level low that's going to kind of sit over this region and slowly drift back northward over the next couple of days. So what you have is a non-tropical start to this process. So what we talk about with these subtropical storms, when you hear that, just means this wasn't a tropical wave that left Africa, went across warm water, and eventually made thunderstorms and lowered pressure and became a tropical storm on its own. Those systems work bottom up. Warm ocean water is the start, and then they build themselves up from the ground. These systems develop from the top down. They start as like winter non-tropical systems, but then they feed off that warm ocean water and they can become tropical over time. So this system to start is going to kind of work off of both. It's going to be a hybrid of the two. It's going to use some ocean water, it's going to use this upper trough that's digging around, and it's going to create we're going to see a storm develop, some kind of broad low pressure develop off this. Now, why do I mention how they form? I mention it because these subtropical developing systems behave different than tropical storms do. They often are very broad and messy, but that does not mean they're not strong. They still can be very strong. And in this setup, we're going to have a pretty high impact event on the coast, and potentially some impacts over Florida in general, because of the nature of it. So let me go ahead and show you that, because the satellite presentation is what it is. You see the trough there. This is the clouds, a little more zoomed in, and you can see there's some lowering pressure today over the Caribbean. There's some stations reporting pressures below 1,000 millibars, which is a little surprising, but I think that maybe that's a little erroneous. But you definitely have some kind of lowering heights here in the Eastern Caribbean. And what's going to happen is this is going to pinwheel up towards the Bahamas over the next few days. So let's go ahead and show you that process. Let me back these models up for you. And we had to start this recording over. It was way too long. So let me back these up for you. So we're going to compare the European and the GFS to give you a broad idea of what this looks like. So again, we're talking on Saturday morning. So we have a couple days before this really gets cranking. But I want to show you the basic pattern. So we're at 850 millibars. We're a little bit above the Earth's surface, but we're not super high up. This is a good level to kind of show you everything. So you have your broad low, down here today in the Eastern Caribbean. It's weak, it's disorganized. There's not much thunderstorm activity. This isn't a really organized storm yet. European we'll go with first. European brings this up Sunday into Monday and has this parked off the coast of the Bahamas, maybe just north of Hispaniola, sometime on Sunday night into Monday morning. Again, this showing a broad low, a sort of lopsided low pressure system. A lot of your thunderstorm activity would probably be off to the east in this scenario. But you can see the developing pattern here as we get into Tuesday or Monday afternoon to Tuesday, because we'll stop here on Monday because this is the setup. Okay, you have a strong high over the Appalachians in the southeast U.S. You have a decently strong low near the Bahamas. And this is the fetch of winds between them. Notice these black lines here, 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 here. They're all uniform and they're all parallel with the wind direction, which is out of the northeast. This means you're going to have a strong fetch of winds. You're going to have a pinching of the winds, if you will. You have a low here. This low rotates counterclockwise in this sort of direction. You have a high here. This high rotates in a clockwise direction. So you've got wind coming this way and going this way. This means that your strong fetch of wind starts picking up Monday afternoon into Tuesday. And this is the first of several days of this. And when we talk about these coastal events, we talk about coastal flooding, we talk about heavy rainfall, especially near the coast. We talk about, strong winds and all that with a nor'easter. This is the setup. You have a low here, you have a high here, and you have that pinch of fetch of winds between them, and that persistence is what is so dangerous, or what is so impactful when the storm system gets going. So at this point, we could have a named storm. We could just have a big mess of clouds and rain and whatnot. But regardless of if it's named or not, you're going to have lower pressure near the Bahamas. You're going to have higher pressure over the Appalachians. You're going to get a strong fetch of wind that's going to impact the Carolinas, coastal Georgia, and Florida over several days to come. Because here we go into Tuesday. The system from the European model is still a broad mess. This is probably not going to be a named storm if this is what actually pans out. But regardless, you still have the high, you still have the low, and you still have the strong fetch of winds. This is going to be, heavy rain, gusty winds, etc., and coastal flooding all for the Florida Peninsula and potentially up for the Carolinas and for Georgia. And this is a pretty good fetch of winds. There's going to be high waves. It's going to be a mess. Okay. Tuesday, Wednesday, the European keeps this kind of low, slow, and doesn't really develop it much. But again, that strong fetch of wind, I mean, that's a fire hose of wind. Notice how the wind direction's also shifted more due east. So this is where the Carolinas and Georgia may get more in on the action. Northern Florida is still getting in the crosshairs of this. And notice how maybe down in South Florida, where you're closer to the low pressure center, you're not really where that high pressure is pinching the winds as much. So you actually don't get as much of an impact on the coast as your friends up north or into Georgia and whatnot do. Just a way to look at it. And then the European and the extended term brings us across the state and just kind of has it hang out, and then it's absorbed by a cold front, and the low is pulled away into next weekend. So that was a week. It showed you a week of weather on the European. GFS, kind of the same story, but stronger. The GFS shows the storm coming up Sunday night into Monday. This is Monday afternoon. Now we're into Tuesday morning. This is where that strong fetch of wind starts really picking up. The GFS is actually trying to develop this into a subtropical or tropical storm near the Bahamas and then pull it across Florida. Now, I want to talk about that real quick because you have this developing low. You have warm water in this region. The water temperatures are, about 28, 29. That's, 81 to 84 degrees. You're going to have plenty of warm water to work with, and you've got that Gulf Stream near Florida and the Bahamas you could also work with. And you're going to offset that with what will look like some decent wind shear aloft, at least beginning. This is the GFS Tuesday into Wednesday. And what you have is this upper low kind of begins to collapse a little bit. So on the surface, your low pressure system somewhere near the Bahamas, but you've got this steady westerly wind that's going to put some wind shear on the storm. You get a little upper low over northern Florida. So you've got some wind shear aloft that's going to kind of offset those tropical waters. So the question is going to be, is the shear strong enough to keep the system from feeding off that ocean water enough to develop into a named storm? So that's what we're going to be watching for as far as impacts go. If it doesn't develop, then you just have the coastal flooding problem. You have the gusty winds, you have the rain, you have the clouds. All that stuff's the same for the Carolinas down to Florida. If you have a developing tropical storm, you're talking about the potential for tropical storm watches and warnings for much of the Florida coastline, and you could have some tropical storm impacts for central South Florida, and then maybe even in the northeast Florida, where you're still going to have that pinching strong wind. So that's the kind of the rub here, is we don't really know if this is going to be able to develop into a named storm or just be a no named nor'easter. That's kind of like the rub here. Potential impacts to come, regardless of this is the GFS or European potential for wind gusts. And look at the wind gust potential. I mean, we're talking about wind gusts 30, 40 miles an hour for the entire Florida Peninsula and up into the Carolinas along the coastline. So you're looking at a pretty substantial threat of that. And even into Georgia, I mean, look at the potential for those winds over 50 miles an hour along the Georgia coast and even sneaking into parts of northern Florida. I mean, that's definitely going to be some impactful winds. The GFS sees a little bit less winds, but in the extended term, the GFS actually pulls this across Florida like this and then develops it over in the Gulf of Mexico and then has it backdoor back into the state. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. We're going to let that kind of play out. Um, not going to say that's what's going to happen. The GFS has been a little out to lunch with this one. So let's let the GFS dream a little bit. I think the European solution is probably closer to reality, but we'll talk about that as the time comes. But you see, again, wind gusts, 35, 45, even into the 50s in some cases, miles per hour, especially if this actually develops. You could have a swath of wind gusts over 50 miles an hour for parts of the south or central Florida peninsula. If, say, this comes across the Bahamas and actually develops into a named storm somewhere around here, these wind gusts will go up. Potential for rainfall is pretty high. You're talking about 3 to 5 inches of rain is what it kind of looks like right now up and down the coastline. As you go inland, the rain totals come down, but pretty much everyone's going to have a cloudy, gusty, nasty mess, and the potential for heavy rainfall parts of the Florida coastline is pretty high at this point. This is the WPC's forecast out to next Saturday. So, these aren't colossal amounts of rainfall, but when you combine that with the potential for coastal flooding, which is going to be probably the biggest concern here, you're talking about beach erosion, coastal flooding, you're in a new moon tidal cycle, so you're going to have high tides. And when you have persistent days of this onshore flow, again, back this up, we'll just use the euro, those winds start in earnest early on Monday. Your onshore winds really start pushing on Monday, and they last through Tuesday. They last into Wednesday. They last into Thursday. I mean, you have 3-4 days coming of these really brutal winds. That is going to lead to coastal flooding because your tides can't escape. They continue to rise slowly. You have rainfall, especially at the coast, and you have this persistent onshore flow that just doesn't let anything change. It's going to be a big impact event. You're going to see a lot of beach erosion, and I imagine a lot of the Northeast Florida beaches that already got pummeled by Ian, they're going to get their ass kicked again. So this is going to be a big impact event for the coastline, and folks along the coast probably want to take this one seriously and keep a close eye on forecasts. So that's what I got for you guys this morning. I would, for now, I know most of my watchers are in Northeast Florida. We need to expect a couple days, Tuesday through at least Friday, of cooler temperatures, a lot of clouds, a good bit of rain off and on. Definitely gusty winds, 35, 45 miles per hour. And we have the potential for a tropical storm watch or warning if this does develop. So I would not be running for the hills. I would not be, freaking out. But we could see a decently solid impact event from this. It's going to be at least a strong nor'easter, and it could be even a little more than that if things develop. But let's give it a couple days. We're going to start tracking the system. We're going to have more for you, and we're going to, like everything else, we're going to be on top of it. We're going to have the updates as they come out. So that's what I got for you guys this morning on your topical update. So we'll be hacking this, and just get ready for a wet, nasty week next week. So that's what I got for you guys today. As always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.